Are we going? Yes, we're going. Hey, so I thought it was about time that I did a video about just how to work efficiently and how to get game dev done better and on time. You know, because pretty much everybody struggles with this, whether it's people in AAA teams, indie teams, solo indies, students, veterans, whatever. There's loads of reasons why game dev is hard, and there's no magic bullet for this stuff, but there are things that you just learn over time and instincts that you refine that, especially if you're at the start of your career or, you know, fairly new to things, I hope would be really useful for you to hear. So this is going to be 9, maybe 8 or 7 if some of my answers are a bit rubbish, but hopefully 9 things to think about to get game dev done better and on time. Rule number 1 that everybody in game dev needs to accept as early as they can is that everything takes longer than it feels like it should do. It just does. And a general saying in the industry is that you should take your estimates and double them. That's how bad it is. And this applies especially if A, you've never made games before, if you're just getting into this stuff. But basically this applies for any project where you're doing a lot of stuff that's new to you. And the thing is that in game dev, we're usually doing loads of stuff that's new to us as a team or as an individual. And that's one of the reasons why everything ends up taking longer than we think, because there's so much unknown in game dev that we don't even know how much we don't know. So that's rule number 1. Everything takes longer than you think it should. Number 2, always plan to be early. Everybody knows that cliche about how if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Yeah, that's it. If you fail to plan, you're there. And that is true, but it's also kind of uselessly vague. And so my take on this is that if you don't plan to be early, bearing in mind what we said about rule number 1, which is that everything takes longer than you think, if you don't plan to be early, then you're literally planning to be late. Because if you plan to just be exactly on time, then all those things that inevitably end up taking longer than you thought will push you past your schedule and you'll be late. I don't know how much you can hear that noise of the builders outside. We've got scaffolding around the flat. Really annoying. So a simple thing you should do, I think, for everything you work on is always aim to be early. Whether that's entire projects, you know, you might have 12 months to finish something, aim to have it done in 10 or 11 months, max, right? Or if your boss gives you a task that you have 2 weeks to do, aim to have some version of it done in 1 week so that you can spend the rest of the week making it better. Always aim to be early, because the worst that can happen is that you get things finished early and you have more time to make it better. But usually, you'll aim to be early, things will take longer than you thought, and you'll just manage to get it done in the time that you have. Number 3 is always set deadlines or targets to aim for and track your failures. I think everybody achieves more and gets more done if they have a target to aim towards. And even if you don't have a deadline that's set by somebody else for you to stick to, I think you should give yourself one. Give yourself a target and see if you hit it. Even if there's no real consequence to you not hitting that target or deadline, just having a target it'll do 2 things, I think. The first thing is that having specific goals and deadlines will help you focus and prioritize what is important with that goal in mind. And that's just a good way to work. It gives you a frame of reference for what you should be doing and what is less important to be doing, that kind of thing. That's just good. The other thing is that even if you don't hit the deadline, you can remain aware that you didn't hit the deadline, and you should, I think. It's really important to reflect now and again on whether or not you're good at hitting deadlines and setting good targets for yourself. And you know, if you do set targets and you repeatedly miss them all the time, you know, it's a good thing to think about. Why do you keep missing targets? Are your targets unrealistic? Is it that you end up wasting a lot of time when it comes down to it and you're not actually spending enough time working? Is it that you put loads of work into things but they end up not being the right things? You know, all this kind of stuff. It's important for you to think about this and evaluate yourself over time to just learn about who you are as a dev and what your strengths and weaknesses are. So like I say, even if there's no consequence to not hitting these targets, it's good to have them and to be aware of how good you are at dealing with them. Number 4 is making sure you prioritize quality over scope. This is something that I think people new to game development especially it's a trap that people fall into, where instead of thinking first, like prioritizing how can I approach this project in a way that will get the best result, like the highest quality work. Instead of thinking like that, people tend to lead with, thinking that a project has to be a certain size. Like, my level needs to be 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long for some reason. Or this game needs to be this huge with this many features or whatever. And I think obviously sometimes scope is part of the quality. It's important to it. And sometimes all of these features and the scope of the game and the scale of it all is a route to achieving quality. But it's not the only way to achieve quality, and also most of the time there are things that you can take out of that scope. You could have cut that bit, you could have got rid of that part of your level, you could have cut these features, and the thing would have been as good, if not better. So it's a good instinct to always think about how you can make elegant decisions, where you achieve a lot with as little as possible. And don't just make things big or ambitious for the sake of it, because quality is the priority. It's never scope. People aren't impressed by how big things are, they're impressed by how good they are. And so you need to prioritize quality over scope. Number 5 is underselling, not overselling. Number 5 is underselling and over-delivering. This is something that I think about in terms of being an employee at a studio or something, having a boss, and when they ask you for an estimate for how long something takes, what do you tell them? If you think a task takes 5 days, do you tell them 5 days? Or do you tell them 4 days because you want to impress them? Or do you tell them 6 days because you want to be careful, right? And my advice here would be to undersell and say 6 days, right? Because usually that would still be okay, so long as you have a reason for why you're asking for 6 days. But also just that little difference between leaning towards asking for a bit more time rather than a bit less. That could be the difference between you being somebody who always delivers on time and sometimes over-delivers and does things really well, and someone else who never delivers on time and whose work is always a bit rushed and not that good. So just that little instinct to ask for more time and undersell and leave yourself room to over-deliver, like I say, that can completely transform your daily life as a dev, as a game dev, and this goes even if you don't have a boss as well. Even if you're a solo indie or you're working on a personal project, be generous with the time that you ask yourself to do things in, because rushing things just isn't the road to quality ever, right? And I think lots of devs are kind of constantly in rushing survival mode, and that just ruins us. So undersell, over-deliver. Don't do the opposite. Number 6, do things in the right order. There's 2 things here. The first one is that generally when you're figuring something out, like figuring out a level or a game, you might be prototyping a game. The first thing is that you should generally test out and prototype the most important, difficult, risky, uncertain aspects of what you're working on first. You test this first because you might find that, some of this stuff doesn't work, or some of your ideas aren't as good as you thought hoped they would be. And if you find these things out first, like early on in the process, then you can spend the rest of the process course correcting and, adjusting, which is good. Whereas if you don't test out these scary, difficult, uncertain things early on, they can screw you later in the process when you don't have time to adjust. And that can get really hairy. The other thing is to be mindful of getting too distracted by the fun stuff for too long. Because whatever you're doing, whatever kind of design it is, or any creative endeavor, frankly, there's the stuff that we really enjoy doing, but when you're trying to finish and ship real things, there's usually a bunch of work that you don't like doing as well. But just because it's boring doesn't mean it's less important. And it's really important to kind of make sure you don't let yourself get carried away with the fun stuff for too long and neglect these equally important but less fun things over there. Number 7, recognize the difference between something being done and something being done well. The quote that springs to mind here is Ernest Hemingway saying that the first draft of anything is shit. And what he means there is that if you have the kind of high standards that you should have as a creative person trying to put out good work, you should never accept the first version that you just banged out of an idea. Because whenever you make the first version, you can always look at it and realize what you could have done better, or what would improve the design, or there'll be new ideas that came up during the process that you'd love to get in there, right? So when it comes to time and estimates and getting things done on time, you've always got to remember that your first version should come early in the process. You shouldn't be aiming to have your first version just squeezed in by the end of the time that you have to work on it, because that just means you're going to submit something that isn't very good. My general rule of thumb here is that however much time I have to work on something, I want something that kind of works and represents the thing at the halfway point. So if I was given 2 weeks to work on a level, or a rough version of a level or something, I would want it playable in 1 week, so that I can spend the second week getting people's feedback, testing it myself, realizing what I should have done instead and how I can make it better. And then I want to spend that second week actually making it better. That's how you achieve good. So this means that whenever you think about targets and deadlines and stuff, it's really important to establish a clear goal for the quality bar that you're trying to hit. If the goal of something is just to get something out there as a starting point, then it might take this amount of time. But if the goal is to get something out there that's good and that you're actually proud of, then it will take much longer. And you should always factor that in, the quality bar that you're aiming for. Number 8 is being realistic about your daily productivity. Whether you're going to the office and working, your office hours, or you're working from home, or you're working on personal projects in your spare time, you got to be realistic about what that time actually means and how much of it translates into meaningful productivity. If you technically work an 8-hour day in an office, 1 of those hours is probably for lunch, 1 or 2 of those hours is probably meetings, half an hour to an hour might be chatting to people you work with, and already we're down to 4 hours of work max, right? And so when you then estimate how many days something will take you, if you say 5 days, you can't be thinking of that 5 days as 40 hours, obviously, right? And also when you are sat at your desk working, not all of that time is banging out amazing work, A lot of it's thinking and researching and deleting what you did and starting again, or, all this stuff. It's really easy to just overestimate this stuff. And working from home, whatever your circumstances are, God help you if you have kids. I don't know how parents are doing this, but there's so many distractions that take away from your 8-hour day, so that's a whole different ball game. And then of course there's doing personal projects in your spare time and stuff. You got to be realistic about how, yes, you can work your evenings, some of your evenings and weekends, but you've still got all the normal real life stuff to do to stay healthy and sane. Just be realistic about what your life is actually like and what office life is actually like and how much work you actually get done a day or a week, Okay, finally, number 9, stop doing things you don't need to do. This is both in terms of scope, wasting your time on extra features or extra parts of the level or making things bigger than they need to be and all this kind of thing. But also things in your process maybe as well, don't do loads of fancy elaborate drawings, detailed drawings of your level in the planning process if there's no point. Don't kind of geek out and over-engineer your solutions to, implementing something or whatever when a simple solution would do. Again, it's always about being elegant whenever you can and, trying to only do what you need to do and be focused on what's important and not faff around with all the unimportant stuff. And this is one of the main things I think that helps experienced people work faster than less experienced people. It's not that experienced people learn to click the mouse faster or they're not typing more words per minute or anything like this. It's just that they're more focused on what's important and what's not important, and they're wasting less time doing things that aren't necessary. So yeah, try and be mindful and serious about what you don't do as well as what you do. So that's it. 9 things to think about to get your game dev done better and on time. Hope it was useful. Cheers for watching, and that's it. Bye.